Good afternoon, everyone, and I welcome you all for this second session, second day of this series 2 on COVID Pulse Pact, the pediatric acute care training. And it is a great to see all our faculty as well as the moderators and those who are participants. I welcome you all on behalf of Pediatric Intensive Care, Department of Pediatrics, and Christian Medical College, Vellore. So this training, acute care training in context to COVID-19, we did a series of lectures in the last month of July. And now we are doing the second series, since it is spaced out, and we are doing from yesterday onwards to the 15th of September. So today is the second day of this session, and today's topic is multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children. Dr. Satish, and neonatal MAS by Dr. Sridhar. And we have the moderators, Dr. Romit Saxena. So I'm happy to introduce him. He's pediatric intensivist and allergist, assistant professor of pediatrics from Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi. And I'm really happy to see Romit, and because he did fellowship in pediatric intensive care in Christian Medical College, Vellore, and he did his MD pediatrics from Maulana Azad. And after that, he did the European diploma in pediatric intensive care as well. And he's very enthusiastic, and he has taken up the IAP task module, that is transport of sick kids, which is very essential in today's context. And he's the national co-convener of that. And he has done his further training in intensive care at Great Ormond Street Hospital and King's College, NHS London, UK. I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Romit Saxena. And also we have another moderator, Dr. Joel John, who's a senior clinical fellow, cardiac intensive care unit at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children and London, UK. She is connected from London, and good morning to Joel at the morning, 9:30 in the morning in UK. So she did her MD Pediatrics from CMC Ludhiana, and after that she was with us as a senior resident assistant professor in cardiac and pediatric ICU for a couple of years, and after that she went to be a consultant pediatrician at Dimapur Christian Institute of Health Sciences and Research. And at the moment, she's getting further training in cardiac intensive care at Great Ormond Street Hospital. With this introduction, I would like them to introduce the speakers and topic for this. Over to Romit and Joel.
Thanks a lot, sir. It is my profound privilege to introduce Dr. Satish, sir. He is the first trained pediatric pneumologist in the country and was trained at Sick Kids. He is the head of the pediatric pneumology department and unit 2 in CMC Vellore. He is a very extremely erudite pediatrician and reviewer in multiple pediatric pneumology and pediatric journals across India and in the international forum as well. As we can see, he has multiple important publications to his credit. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Romit.
I'd like to introduce
Yes.
Dr. Sridhar. Sridhar sir is the professor in the Department of Neonatology. He did his neonatal fellowship and then consultant job at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, Sydney in Australia. He is a faculty and examiner for DM in neonatology in many universities, and he is a very prominent reviewer in Indian Pediatrics, IJP, and many other allied journals, including Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal of Tropical Pediatrics. And he's got over 40 publications in national and international journals. I would this time like to recollect something I saw firsthand when the CDC team from Atlanta came, and they were actually talking down on people. Sridhar sir just walked in, and the moment he started talking, they just became quiet and started taking down notes. So I think that would explain in a nutshell about the vast experience and the treasure of knowledge from sir. So we are eagerly waiting and looking forward to listening to both of our speakers today. And thank you for this opportunity. Over to Satish sir.
Thank you once again for this opportunity to talk to you about MISC in children. So next, for 30 to 40 minutes, what I am going to talk to you is about case definition. What is MISC? When you suspect MISC, when you're sitting in an OPD or in an emergency, what are various clinical manifestations? How to investigate them? And what are treatment guidelines available? And finally, we'll touch upon CMC's protocol for treating children with MISC. So whether the third wave will come or not, we are not very sure, but we are very much concerned about preparedness now, what's happening now. I want to thank EBAR for making awareness to happen this program about COVID, because when the third wave comes, we are ready to manage and the challenging time. So nobody knows whether the third wave will come or not. All these predictions are based on the statistical and mathematical projection, and there is no epidemiological medical data available to prove it, whether you will have third wave in September or in October. And remember that US has got third wave, UK has got third wave. India, we don't know whether it's a first wave or second wave because we never had a normalcy in between. So it's continuing. And children, again, a lot of worry about the children will be more affected by the third wave. And we know that Indian children are totally different from the children in US or UK because we have a lot of inborn immunity to Indian children there. And our vaccination schedules, whether there is evidence to say that our BCG, MMR give much more protection to our children. And government is very much prepared, is preparing in all the levels, training, teaching, management, equipments, drugs, all are ready for the third wave. So what, as a pediatrician, what I say that is no need to panic. And because we know that very few or very less than 2% of the children requires hospitalization. And it's very easy to diagnose in children because parents come at very early stage. And more than 90% of the kids go home within a week's time. So my only humble request is for all the pediatricians and whoever people watching here to tell your patients and elderly to get vaccinated. Then waiting for the children to get vaccinated. Let the children live, eat healthy and lead a normal life. And also during this pandemic, I request all of the parents and the doctors to advise your patients to reduce the screen time, which is another one because more damage is caused by post-COVID than the real COVID. So when we talk about MIS-C, these are some of the papers, newspapers talking about MIS-C, about the new disease. So I'm sure some of this from Times of India, COVID-related children's disease linked to blood cell changes. Then Hindustan Times says scientists decode immune system changes in children with a rare COVID syndrome. And Indian Express says new research, COVID-related disorder alters the immune system in a child. And Bengaluru teen with COVID-19 winds up the hospital with severe complications. There are so many things which started to happen after this COVID pandemic happened. So what I feel is if you don't know about these things happening in and around you, you will definitely miss the MIS-C. So I think we should keep our eyes open and ears open and mind also to open, know about this condition so that when the patient comes, we'll definitely pick up these children at the early stage. So I'm going to start with a case. I'm going to start with two cases which we saw during this last pandemic. Our diagnosis will be totally different during a non-pandemic. So this is a 6-year-old child, previously healthy, came with fever for 4 days, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. And when the child came, child is in shock, and child has got bilateral eye congestion. So normally what as a pediatrician, we diagnose this child as acute gastroenteritis with severe dehydration or septicemia with shock. This child was given fluid bolus. That's what we usually do. Start on high dose, high level antibiotics and shifted to ICU for management. And this child SARS-CoV-2 RT-PCR was positive. So this is one child present with the GA symptoms and shock. The other child has got fever, vomiting, and seizures on day 2. 5-year-old girl. And this child had previous history of febrile seizure. So this child also was febrile, was in shock, with CRT of more than 4 seconds. So diagnosed was sepsis for meningitis with shock, started on bolus for shock, started on antibiotics, Van Miro shifted to ICU, was improved and then shifted to COVID ward because RT-PCR was negative. But on the day 5, you can see the same child developed symptoms of eye congestion, rash and edema of the peripheries, suggesting of like a Kawasaki-like picture. So this child SARS-CoV-2 antibody came as positive. So I leave it these 2 cases, we'll come to that. When you want to talk about the history of Miss C. So this is from the recent journal from vaccine. So first thing during this pandemic started in April 2020. So what they started is the UK started seeing similar with the different peculiar manifestations. They clumped together. This is the PICU. They alerted why these children are presenting like KD with shock-like presentation. Within 5 days, you don't believe, May 1st, the first RCPCH PIMS-TS guidelines was published. Then from the Italy, they found out the next month, they started to see increased incidence of Kawasaki disease. They started thinking why the Kawasaki disease, almost 30% increase in the incidence of Kawasaki disease in Italy. They are thinking, what is this? What is is there any relationship with COVID pandemic? Then CDC, US came with the definition of Miss C in May 14th, and May 15th, WHO came with the case definition. After that, the story started to grow. So each and everybody started to present cases of Miss C. So this is the first came from the French group. They call them as Kawa COVID because a lot of children have Kawasaki-like illness. Then there's a UK cohort of 58 children published in JAMA. They call them as pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome temporarily associated with SARS-CoV-2. They call them as PIMS-TS. Then the biggest series came from US, from 186 children published in NEJM. So what does it mean? So the name is different. UK people said it is PIMS-TS, US people said it is Miss C, and WHO says it is Miss C because WHO's classification criteria is simpler to follow. So what does the WHO has given a guidelines for diagnosis? So any children 0 to 19 years who presents with fever more than 3 days, and any 2 of the following. This is what very important you should know. Rash, bilateral prurient conjunctivitis, mucocutaneous inflammation like KD-like features. If they come with shock, if they come with myocardial dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis, coronary abnormalities, and echo findings showing myocarditis, evidence of coagulopathy, and GA symptoms. So out of these 5, 2 should be there. And other important thing, you should have elevated ESR, CRP, and ProCal, very high inflammatory markers. And remember that this is what very, very important. You should not have any obvious microbiological cause for inflammation, including sepsis, staphylococcal, or toxic shock syndrome. And they also said evidence of COVID-19, either in the form of RT-PCR, COVID antibody, or likelihood contact with the patient with COVID-19. So this is what the criteria by by WHO was given. What is the problem with this criteria? So in India, we see a lot of enteric fever, shigellosis, even acute appendicitis. All these people, all these conditions can fulfill your Miss C criteria. All of them will have fever. Suppose this eye changes, fluent changes, eye changes may not be there in most of those things. But remember that they can present the myocardial involvement, they can present the coronary abnormalities, they can have coagulopathy, they can have GA symptoms. If you take enteric fever can have fever, they can have present shock, they can have GA symptoms. So they will fulfill. ESR, CRP may be high, and blood culture report, you know that it is not always positive. Remember that during now, every child is already had a contact with the patient with COVID-19. So enteric fever can fulfill this criteria. Shigella can fulfill this criteria. Similarly, dengue, the other commonest infection which we see, and rickettsial infections we see a lot in our hospital. Again, they can fulfill the criteria. Again, fever, they can have shock, they can have coagulopathy, they can have abdominal symptoms. Remember, dengue may not have very raised ESR and CRP because the viral infection, and Other microbiological, dengue is easy to diagnose, but not the others, because rickettsial, we know we need specific IgM. Wheal-Felix is not a very good test. And again, they may have a contact with positive with patients with COVID-19. So because of this confusion, the Indian government has modified the definition a little bit different. They took the WHO definition, everything. But remember, they added a class called alternative diagnosis must be excluded, especially in India, where you have malaria, dengue, where tropical infection has to be excluded. Toxic shock syndrome has to be excluded. Bacterial sepsis has to be excluded. So this is what our Family Welfare of Government of India publication said about the definition. Again, we have seen a lot of patients like this in this couple of months. Dengue, malaria, seasonal influenza, chikungunya, enteric fever, they also can coexist with COVID-19. So we have some children who are presented like a COVID, like eye changes and all, but their scrub IgM is positive. They have Yashkar. So COVID infections can present with MESI, so which is not new. So how do you treat? You treat both of them. You treat the rickettsial infection, you treat the MESI based on the clinical presentation. Okay, so we'll come to the MESI. So mostly 80% of the people, children with MESI recurs intensive care unit, and the mortality is about 2%. This is from the various studies done elsewhere and reported. So this is a nice systematic review which looked about almost 1,000 children with MESI. What they found out is most of the children are older age group. You can see it here. Most of the children are more than 5 years. Males are more common, and overweight children are more prone to have MESI. Then the almost 99.94% had fever. Most common symptom is gastrointestinal. You can see 85% of the children present with GA symptoms, followed by cardiovascular systems, either in the form of tachycardia, shock, myocarditis. Then they can have almost 55% can have Kawasaki-like illness, also can present. And as I told, 80% who had severe disease course recurs ICU admission, remaining 15 to 20% does not have mild disease, which can be managed in the ward. And you can see here, RT-PCR positive is seen in 40% of the children, and your IgG positivity is seen in almost 65% of the children. And treatment depends on what protocol you follow and how do you manage them. And outcome, if you see here, outcome is mortality is about 1.9%. So even though it is a little rare disease, there is still, if you don't recognize early, there is still mortality is there. So when you want to put together about various presentation of MESI, we have usually 3 phenotypes are there. Because this is very important, because when the management is different for all these 3 phenotypes. So we have febrile inflammatory state, where you have only fever, no shock, nothing else. We have raised ESR, CRP, and your RT-PCR or your antibody can be positive. Second thing is like KD-like illness, like Kawasaki-like illness, where you can have either incomplete Kawasaki or complete Kawasaki. They don't develop shock or any multi-organ failure. The third group is the severe MIAC, where you have multi-system involvement, cardiac involvement, shock. All of them have markedly elevated inflammatory markers. And again, so MESI is not a single phenotype. There are different phenotypes of MESI. MESI can present with KD-like phenotype. MESI can present with, along with toxic shock syndrome. MESI can present with Kawasaki shock syndrome also. So various phenotypes are can be present with MESI. It's not a single disease. So this is a very nice article again from Journal of Experimental Medicine, where they try to differentiate MESI and Kawasaki disease. Kawasaki disease, I think all the pediatrician knows very well. Usually it is common in children less than 5 years, and they have 4 out of 5 clinical criteria, starting from the eyes, oral changes, nodes, coronary artery involvement, and they can have peripheral changes. They'll usually have leukocytosis, thrombocytosis. Completely differentiate is MESI, where there is usually older age group. They can have more cardiac involvement, GA involvement, which is not common in KD. And also they can have shock presentation. KD presenting shock is rare, but MESI presents with shock more, and they have lymphopenia. They may require like very high treatment like inotropes, ventilation, and ECMO. What is common between these two is fever, your rash, conjunctivitis, cardiac involvement. Again, myocarditis is very common MIS-C. Coronary artery abnormalities are common in Kawasaki disease. Kawasaki disease also can present with macrophage activation syndrome and shock. So that can be present. So there are some similarities between Kawasaki disease and MIS-C. Okay, so this is a graph from France. What they found out, what I want to try to show from this graph is, this yellow graph is the one number of COVID-19 hospitalization. You can see here, the COVID-19 hospitalization started to come down and the MIS-C started to go up. So there is a lag in the presentation from infection. So the MIS-C, the interval between the COVID symptoms or exposure to COVID and the MIS-C was about 4 to 6 weeks. That's what's shown in this graph. And this is a typical picture of SARS-CoV-2 infection, which happens in the adults. Usually stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. This is what happens in adults. But children, remember, we don't have the stage 2 of pulmonary phase. Stage 3 hyperinflammatory phase is there, but these are the stages of acute COVID infection. What we see in MIS-C is the issue, the late reaction to COVID. We'll talk about that. So as I told you, in Italy, they showed that Kawasaki disease incidence went very high during the COVID pandemic. That's the first concept of MIS-C came. So they are here also, they postulate that Kawasaki disease is provoked by genetically problematic children by any viral infection. Same thing they are trying to say here also. The virus is a SARS-CoV-2 virus, which triggers the MIS-C. Basically, if the child has got any form of genetic problem. That's why they say that rare inborn errors of immunity altering the immune response to SARS-CoV-2. That's why some children develop, not all the children who had SARS-CoV-2 does not develop MIS-C. They also talked about the other important thing. So there is an interferon response. There is an important the immune system which stops any infection in the body, especially the viral infection. So in children with MIS-C, if the viral load is huge, and is there are some genetic problems are there, what you found out, the interferon does not work very well. So what happens is this leads to delayed interferon response, leading to slow viral clearance and more inflammation. That's why you have MIS-C. So this overall view, why some children develop MIS-C, I told you they are genetically susceptible individuals. So there's a lot of studies going on. Remember that this is a new disease. So these are things they are trying to find out. Genetically susceptible in individuals. When you have a SARS-CoV infection, your antigen presenting cells stimulating the CD4 T cells. The CD4 T cells started to proliferating, stimulating the B cells to produce antibodies. If you are genetically wrong and they produce more and more autoantibodies, which lead to cytokine storm, leading to all the manifestations of multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So this is a latest paper from again from Immunity from May 2021. What they're trying to say is in SARS-CoV-2, we have both the systems are involved. Hyperinflammation from the innate immunity and from the adaptive immunity. We know that innate immunity, that's why we have a lot of elevated CRP, ferritin D dimer. They have decreased HLA DR4 and CD86 from the macrophage and increased alarmins from the neutrophils. NK cells also get increased activity. And again, adaptive immunity produces a lot of autoreactive T cells, which finally leads to autoantibodies and tissue damage. That's what we see in MIS-C. Okay, coming back to clinical. So when will you suspect? Nowadays, we are seeing a lot of patients in OPD. When will you suspect MIS-C? Anybody who comes with fever more than 3 days with at least any of the following. So they can present with Kawasaki-like symptoms like mucocutaneous, or they can present with gastrointestinal symptoms. They present with systemic inflammation, very high-grade fever, myalgia, tachycardia, hypotension, shock, and neurological symptoms also. They can present with headache, altered mental status, meningismus, focal deficit, and seizures. So you should suspect MIS-C when these children present like this. So these are the classical rashes. What we see, this is a classical non-pulmonary conjunctivitis in a boy who present like a KD-like phenotype. This is one of my SLE girl who presented like this conjunctival congestion. You can see the faint rash on the chest, and you can see the rash on the hands and on the typical Kawasaki-like pedal edema over the dorsum of the hands and the feet. So these are few of our patients' rashes in MIS-C. So the other important manifestation is cardiac manifestation. Again, this is a combined, it's like a systematic review of various cardiac manifestation published in circulation. So what they found out here is 80% of them present with shock. Again, I told you 60% can present with the incomplete KD. And they can have elevated troponin, BNP, NT-proBNP. They can have ECG changes, echo changes. Almost 30 to 60% have left ventricular dysfunction. Another important thing, 14 to 48% also can have coronary artery dilatation, which is like a Kawasaki-like disease. So these are the various manifestation, cardiac manifestation. When you look into the neurological manifestation, again, they can present with the encephalopathy, they can present with stroke, they can present with the demyelination, Guillain-Barré syndrome, acute fulminant cerebral edema. So these are the various neurological manifestation reported in COVID-19 with MIS-C. Okay, you can see here MIS-C diagnosis in this code. So when you suspect MIS-C, somebody has come to a OPD with fever, some red rash, not in shock, not in multi-system failure, we do screening tests. So what are screening tests we do? We do CBC, ESR, CFT, LFT, electrolytes, creat, and we do blood culture because that's what we routinely do for any child to rule out tropical infections. If the fever is more than 7 days, we do Vidal-Wheel Felix, and we do RT-PCR and serology. So these are the things we do on day 1. And if something is related to that CRP more than 50, actually, if you look into that, most of studies showed CRP in 3 digits, more than 100, ESR, and if they have lymphopenia, thrombocytopenia, hyponatremia, neutrophilia, and hypoalbuminemia. This all we say some of them positive screen. Then you should suspect whether this child has got really MIS-C. But somebody comes to severe manifestation, this shock, myocardial dysfunction. Then we have to evaluate, apart from step 1, we have to do cardiac evaluation in full, ECG, echo, proBNP, and troponin T, and inflammatory markers, coagulation markers, LDH, triglyceride, and cytokine panel only in the research center, not as a routine clinical care management. Triglycerides is mainly to look when they have pancytopenia and when they suspect macrophage activation syndrome. And SARS-CoV-2 serology, because the children presents late, that time your RT-PCR may be negative. So definitely we have to do either IgM and IgG of SARS of COVID. Okay, so again, the government of India has given very clear guidelines for managing children with COVID less than 19 years of age. So what do you see when you suspect MIS-C? When they present with fever, epidemiology linked to SARS-CoV-2, clinical features suggestive of MIS-C, GI symptoms, Kawasaki-like symptoms, cardiovascular symptoms, neurological symptoms. So first question is there a shock or life-threatening manifestation present? If they present, you do both tier 1 and tier 2 test. I told you step 1 and step 2 test. And if they fulfill the diagnostic criteria for MIS-C, you start treating like MIS-C. If they don't have the typical features of MIS-C, you look for always evaluate for the other causes of MIS-C, other differential diagnosis for MIS-C, like your routine tropical infections. If there is nothing is positive, and if still the fever is persistent, then you go for tier 2 evaluation. And if they fulfill the criteria for MIS-C, then you treat like MIS-C. If they don't fulfill the criteria, I keep looking for the evolution of symptoms of MIS-C. And if they have symptoms of cardiac dysfunction, cardiac coronary involvement, you treat them with the MIS-C as per the protocol. So this way we have to evaluate any child with a suspicion of MIS-C. Okay, so we know how to suspect MIS-C. So we talked about how do you diagnose MIS-C based on the WHO criteria and what are the investigations you do. Now we are going to come to the treatment aspect. So the treatment aspect, this is from the American College of Rheumatology, their guidelines on April 2021. So what they say is remdesivir, no role in the management of MIS-C because MIS-C is not acute COVID. It is usually the late immune response to COVID infection in children. So remdesivir doesn't have no role. Antibiotics as per your local protocols. And what do they say? Again, if the child comes with shock or organ threatening disease, you give IVIG plus methylprednisolone 1 to 2 mg per kg. Then if they have refractory disease, you go to high dose methylprednisolone, which is 10 to 30 mg per kg, or you give anakinra. Anakinra is a IL-1 blocker, but is not available in India. So we don't worry about that. So if they don't present with shock, you give again IVIG. If they have refractory, you give low dose steroids. Low dose steroids means 1 to 2 milligram per kg. Don't give pulse steroids for the children who are not sick. Antiplatelet, they said low dose aspirin to be given to everybody who has got thrombocytosis. And if there is a coronary artery aneurysm, Z score more than 2.5 to 10. So this is typical like your KD presentation. So if you have thrombocytosis or coronary artery involvement, Z score more than 2.5, you continue antiplatelets till the coronary arteries resolve. So we have to do echo at 6 weeks also. If the 6 weeks echo is normal, you stop the antiplatelet. Anticoagulation, they given you clear guidelines. Coronary artery Z score more than 10. That means large aneurysm, documented thrombosis, or if somebody comes with severe LV dysfunction, EF less than 35%, then you give anticoagulation with enoxaparin. If somebody presents with MAS like picture, ARDS, shock, cardiac dysfunction, and if you suspect MAS like macrophage activation syndrome, you start them on high dose methylprednisolone and anakinra. I said we don't have tocilizumab, which is a IL-6 blocker, which works very well in children who are having MAS or hemophagocytosis. Okay, so this is the IAP protocol for management of MIS-C. So I said earlier, MIS-C is not a single phenotype. They have 3 different phenotypes. So the first phenotype is the shock. It is similar to the US protocol. If they come with shock, you give IVIG and you give high dose methylprednisolone and empirical antibiotics on the day 1. And if the child is getting better, you decrease the dose of steroids on day 2. Treatment failure, you consider rheumatologist's opinion for biological agents like tocilizumab. KD phenotype, very straightforward. You treat like KD, you give IVIG and methylprednisolone for 3 to 5 days. If they don't respond, you give high dose methylprednisolone. Again, if you want to give biologics like infliximab or tocilizumab, again consult a pediatric rheumatologist. Supportive care, always necessary, which is where the ICU comes, is very, very crucial, because 80% of the children with MIS-C needs ICU support. And if they have no shock, no KD phenotype, only fever, that's called febrile inflammatory state, you rule out all the other infections. You treat them. If they are improved, you treat them with just give steroids 1 to 2 milligram for 3 to 5 days. That is enough for febrile inflammatory state. Remember that, rule out other tropical infections before you call them as febrile inflammatory state. And again, Government of India has given the same protocol, but what here they're trying to do is, again, 3 phenotypes: shock phenotype, KD phenotype, without shock. What they try to do is you give IVIG, but this is little different from the IAP protocol. Here they want to give only 2 milligram of steroids. Don't give high dose steroids on day 1, because remember in India, we have still all the tropical infections and gram-negative sepsis which are presenting with shock. So wait for 48 hours, and then if they don't improve, then you give high dose steroids. By the time you'll get your COVID PCR, your blood culture will be negative, then you can try that. KD phenotype is same, you give IVIG and steroids. MIS-C without shock is your febrile inflammatory state. You give steroids for 3 to 5 days, 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram. So what is the issues with all these guidelines? As I said, this is a new disease. We know about this disease for the last 1.5 years. And all these guidelines are available from the retrospective data. There is no prospective data to say that IVIG works better than steroids, low dose steroids, high dose steroids. Again, the guidelines are formed from the particular region, which available drugs. I told you, American ACR says that to give anakinra. We don't have anakinra in our India. So we cannot use that model for in our guidelines. So not practical in a resource limited settings like us. So you have to go by the clinical judgment. Close monitoring is very, very important. You can step up or step down depending on the clinical scenario. And remember that you have to keep updating your knowledge with the evolving evidence. So based on this, all this available protocol, so ID, rheumatology, and our ICU team, we made a protocol for treating children with MIS-C in CMC. This is what we treat. So again, almost similar to what the government says, febrile inflammatory state without shock, you give steroids 2 milligrams, 1 to 2 milligrams for 3 to 5 days. Either you give methylprednisolone or you give Dexa 0.5 milligram per kg OD. And MAS HLH is same. That's the last protocol. KD again, KD, plain KD, we give IVIG and aspirin. KD with shock, we give steroids. And for shock, and after multiple discussions, we divided the shock into 3: moderate shock, severe shock, and end organ disease. Like moderate shock, we give only 2 milligram per kg. We won't give any IVIG at all. If they come with severe shock with myocardial involvement, we'll give IVIG plus 2 milligram per kg. We never give pulse steroids on the day 1. And end organ also, we give IVIG plus methylprednisolone 2 mg per kg. And we closely monitor them. Within 24 to 48 hours, if they don't improve, then we'll consider giving high dose steroids or the pulse steroids. So this is what the protocol we are following. And we have got very good results. We're just following all these children now. Okay, so what about the Indian story of Missy? I told you about the Western story of Missy. So what is the Indian story of Missy? So this is the first case report which is published from Child Trust Hospital in May 2020. It's the first case report of COVID-19 successfully treated with IVIG and tocilizumab. And there are few series, which is one is from Mumbai, 23 patients from SRCC hospital is all over the Mumbai. And there is another one, 19 children with Missy from Kanchi Kamakoti Child Trust Hospital from November 2020. This is here, they have 19 children. We have published our experience in June 2021 in Indian Pediatrics. We have about 16 children who had Missy. This is the wave 1. This is the first wave. Second wave, we have almost we have about 70 to 80 children with Missy so far. So coming back to our case, so the child 1 presented with shock. You can see here they have low platelets, ESR, CRP is very high, ferritin is very high, D-dimer is very high. The Kawasaki-like illness, again, you can see the D-dimer is very high, and the platelet is only 1.5 lakhs. Normal Kawasaki will have about 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs. So this is a Missy with KD phenotype, which had only 1.59 thing. So when you look into this, so RT-PCR, COVID serology was positive, and RT-PCR was negative. So here, this first child with shock required adrenaline, and we treated with dexamethasone, and IVIG was not given. KD child, we gave IVIG plus dexamethasone, low molecular weight heparin if they go into shock and all. 6 children, we give low molecular weight heparin. Outcome, both of them went home. So far we talked about Missy. Again, remember, during this pandemic, now today, unless the wave 3 comes, remember that Missy has to be kept in mind, but don't diagnose everybody with Missy. I read a very sad story about a nephrologist who died a couple of days ago in WhatsApp. I don't know how much is true. Apparently, she had dengue, but she thought she has got COVID, and she has herself taken low molecular weight heparin and steroids, and apparently she bleed to die, but the diagnosis is dengue. But so over-diagnosing is also a problem. So here is one example. This is a 3-year-old child, fever, jaundice, fast breathing for 1 day. And you can see here, peripheries are warm, pulses are feeble. So this child presented with the shock. So septicemia with shock, Vancomycin, RT-PCR came as negative. And you can see here, this child has got white cell counts are low, platelets are low. CRP is only 34, not very high. D-dimer is mildly elevated. And this child, because of these low platelets and all, this child underwent bone marrow also. But dengue IgM came as positive, because this child, dengue IgM can done after 5 days is positive. And final diagnosis was severe dengue infection with HLH. This child will fulfill the criteria for MISC. So this child need mechanical ventilation, inotropes, antibiotics, and dexamethasone is given mainly for the secondary HLH, was improved and transferred to the ward and discharged. So how do you differentiate acute COVID and Missy? Acute severe COVID, which can come with sometimes with presenting with hyperinflammatory state. Usually Missy is previously healthy children, and severe COVID usually comes for pre-existing disease, obesity, diabetes, neurodevelopmental disorders, malignancy. So usually severe COVID comes only to those children. Healthy children, usually we don't expect severe COVID. So Missy is presents like that. And we know that severe COVID presents the respiratory distress, but Missy presents more of GI symptoms, KD phenotype, myocardial dysfunction. And again, severe COVID will have RT-PCR positive, but usually in MIS-C, they have antibody positive, and severe MIS-C, MIS-C will have very high inflammatory markers because it is a cytokine storm. So take home message, consider MIS-C during this pandemic. 3 phenotypes, don't forget these 3 phenotypes: febrile inflammatory phase, Kawasaki disease, and shock state. Overdiagnosis or delayed diagnosis, both are problematic when you have a child with MIS-C. Tropical infection can mimic or can coexist with MIS-C. Stepwise investigation based on the clinical presentation is very, very crucial, and treatment has to be tailored according to the phenotype. Not every child gets IVIG and high dose steroids. And always remember, we should have a very good team. I am lucky to have this team with me from the pediatric side, because pediatrician is the first person who is going to see these children in the emergency or in the outpatient clinic. And we need a support from the intensivist, cardiologist when they have severe cardiac dysfunction, ID people, and a rheumatologist to decide on immunosuppression, whether needs all those things. So I am going to stop it here. I think after Sridhar's talk, we'll have the question and answer session. And MIS-C has got MIS-A, which is seen in adults, and MIS-N in the neonates. I think Sridhar will talk about MIS-C in neonates hereafter. Thank you for patient listening. Thank you all.
Thank you, Satish sir, for that really enlightening talk. We'll take questions at the end.
Joel has to unmute, I think so.
Oh, she's we can hear her.
Thank you, Satish sir, for that really enlightening talk. We will take the questions at the end. You can type in your questions in the chat box. I invite Sridhar sir for the next talk now.
Thank you. Actually, I was wondering, after listening to Satish's talk, I can just say same as what Satish said. I'm not sure that there's much that I will add on. Okay, Satish was saying that this is a fairly new condition, and it's an evolving sort of a syndrome and a condition, which nothing much is actually understood about it. And we are sort of evolving in our knowledge in both how to diagnose and how to manage. And if you say that for MIS-C, I'm sure that you have to say that for MIS-N. Okay, there is very little understood about neonatal multicystic inflammatory syndrome and also COVID-19 in newborn. And the evidence and the thing keeps changing. Okay. As you know, in newborn, generally, it's not the newborn alone, it's the mother newborn dyad, right? So unless you know about the pregnant woman and what happens to the pregnant woman, it's very unlikely that you will actually understand newborn health also, okay? So I'll just start off with a small slide of COVID-19 in pregnancy, right? Pregnant women as such, symptomatology in COVID-19 is not too different from a non-pregnant woman, right? So she also will present with maybe cough and shortness of breath, headache, fever, etc., etc. But it's very likely that the pregnant woman will become more symptomatic as compared to a non-pregnant woman. So you can see this portion here. A pregnant woman is 3 times more likely to require ICU admission, at least nearly 3 times as likely to require ventilation as compared to a non-pregnant woman when she develops COVID-19 infection, as also ECMO nearly 2.5 times, and the mortality is nearly twice as much as a non-pregnant woman when they develop COVID-19. Having said that, we have been fairly lucky, and I think thanks to our medicine team and our obstetric team, I think over the past 2 years, we've had, if I'm correct, only 1 maternal death because of COVID-19, and that too was in a mother who came in the terminal stage from Chittoor, right? There are certain reasons why a pregnant woman, COVID-19 affects a pregnant woman more because of the physiological changes during pregnancy, right? The heart rate is higher, the cardiac output is higher during pregnancy. And because the diaphragm, there is an upward shift of the diaphragm due to the pregnancy, there is a decreased lung capacity. And all these actually exacerbate the respiratory compromise because of COVID. And as you all know, pregnancy is also a prothrombotic state. And therefore, the risk for thromboembolism theoretically is much higher in pregnancy, right? So for all these reasons, it's very likely that a pregnant woman is more likely to get admitted because of COVID. And therefore, as neonatologists, our problem is one of the things that FOGC, that is Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology Society of India, and most of the people, agree, is that in a severely ill woman, if you're not able to manage her, one of the things beyond at least 30 weeks is to actually terminate the pregnancy. So we might end up having more preterm children. And as with any viral illness, there are more stillbirths. There might be more preterm births with COVID-19 too. Having said that, like I said, we do not see the degree of maternal mortality that we saw with H1N1 with COVID-19. We used to see much more maternal mortality and morbidity with H1N1. Thankfully, that has not happened with COVID-19 so far, right? So once a pregnant woman develops COVID-19, there are many ways that she can spread the infection to the newborn. One is the intrauterine spread, and that is hematogenous spread through the placenta, right? And the common thing with, as with many bacterial infections, etc., is that the amniotic fluid will get infected. The baby keeps swallowing the amniotic fluid through pregnancy and through the intrapartum period, and the baby either aspirates the infected amniotic fluid or absorbs the infected amniotic fluid. During birth, intrapartum, the baby may be exposed to infected feces or secretions or blood. And the last thing, which they think probably elsewhere, most common cause of transmission of COVID-19 to the newborn is transmission from the mother or the healthcare worker or caregiver postnatally. There is a large degree of doubt as to whether breast milk, there is transmission through breast milk. And so far, there is no clear-cut evidence to say that COVID-19 will be transmitted through breast milk from the mother to the baby. And therefore, the postpartum transmission is more likely, just as with adult-to-adult transmission or adult-to-child transmission, is respiratory droplets and through the respiratory tract. Right. So there are about three, like I said, though it's not very well understood, there are sort of three distinct syndromes or three distinct criteria. We neonatologists like to actually classify everything as early onset, late onset, etc. Just as with sepsis, COVID-19 also, there is an early onset COVID-19 infection and a late onset COVID-19 infection. And just as with sepsis, early onset COVID-19 infection presupposes that this infection has been transmitted in utero. That means or intrapartum, during delivery or prior to delivery from the mother to the baby. So possibly vertical transmission from the mother to the newborn. Whereas late onset COVID infection is supposed to be from postnatal transmission from the mother or the healthcare worker. And the last is, like I said, a very poorly understood and evolving thing, which is multisystem inflammatory syndrome in the newborn, right? So early onset COVID-19 infection, as I said, is supposed to be mostly perinatal transmission. So because it's perinatal transmission, it can occur between 2 to 7 days after birth. The majority of these are asymptomatic. Okay, this is from the US data, but we find that most of our children, probably a higher percentage of children, are actually asymptomatic, and mild symptoms account for about 40 to 50%, and moderate to severe for the rest of the thing. And the symptoms will be just as with higher older children, can be rhinorrhea, cough, fever, respiratory distress, poor feeding, and GI symptoms like diarrhea or vomiting. And in the lab, you will have leukocytosis, lymphopenia, thrombocytopenia, and elevated inflammatory markers. Right. Late onset COVID infection can occur 5 to 7 days after birth or even thereafter, a couple of weeks after birth, and supposed to be possibly postnatal transmission, nearly the same symptoms. However, the chances of the baby requiring respiratory support in late onset COVID infection, nearly 1/3 of babies are supposed to have had need for respiratory support in late onset COVID infection as compared to a much smaller percentage in early onset COVID infection, right? And therefore more X-ray abnormalities are noted and more DIC is also noted in late onset COVID infection. As with most diseases in the newborn period, management always starts with supportive management, managing blood glucose, temperature, fluid, and electrolytes. Oxygen therapy, preferably with nasal cannula less than 2 liters per minute of nasal cannula oxygen, followed by non-invasive ventilation, HFNC or CPAP. There is no specific indication in COVID-19 for invasive ventilation in the newborn. And so if you have a preterm baby who's born to a mother who's COVID positive and the baby also turns out to be COVID positive, the indication for ventilation and the baby has respiratory distress syndrome, the indication for ventilation will remain the same as for respiratory distress syndrome, or as with, say, meconium aspiration syndrome, or in COVID-19 pneumonia also, as with any other pneumonia in newborn, respiratory failure which does not respond to non-invasive ventilation. Right? There's very little evidence for remdesivir and steroids in acute COVID infection. Right? There are 2 case reports of remdesivir, but again, like I said, there is no real consensus, or there is very little evidence, though some of the guidelines do mention remdesivir. Finally, you have the multisystem inflammatory syndrome in neonates. Okay, Satish was mentioning that this occurs a few weeks or days after exposure to somebody with COVID, or after a child who develops COVID-19 infection. Like I said, newborn are slightly different. Newborn generally should not be seen in isolation, and it's always the mother-baby dyad. Okay, and therefore, a newborn baby can develop features, and there are case reports of MIS-CN as early as 2 days after birth, which seems very, dicey. But that's because basically the mother develops infection a few weeks prior to delivery, and maternal lymphocytes and maternal immune cells actually cross the placenta and cause a hyperimmune response in the newborn, right? And therefore, or the newborn who develops an early onset or a late onset, COVID-19 infection could, in about after 3 to 4 weeks, develop a MIS-N. Okay, but it's more likely seen when there is a perinatal transmission, or rather, there is a maternal infection or a close contact of the mother with the COVID-19 patient, followed by the newborn developing MIS-N. Right? So as with older children, there are case reports of myocarditis with increased troponin and BNP and coronary aneurysms, DIC, right? Hypoxemia with PPHN. This is something which is fairly peculiar in most case series and case reports of MIS-CN in newborn, the thing of having persistent pulmonary hypertension, right? Feeding intolerance, as with older children, GI symptoms with diarrhea, vomiting, but they can also present with an acute abdomen with a necrotizing enterocolitis-like syndrome, and also multi-system involvement, etc. Okay, so like I said, the clinical features of MIS-CN, there have been descriptions from as early as 2 days after birth. GI symptoms can be NEC-like syndrome of acute abdomen, but as simple as diarrhea and vomiting. CVS, hemodynamic instability, pericardial effusion, myocarditis, PPHN. There is a large case series from Kolhapur of about 20 children with MIS-N. I think this is one of the largest case series, of whom about 6 children had 2:1 heart block. Okay? And a fair number of their children also had coronary artery dilatation, though this does not seem to be the case in most of the other case series or case reports of MIS-N from elsewhere. Okay? And there can also be coagulopathy and thrombosis, and as usual, respiratory failure. Right. So this is the WHO classification, which first actually came from the Italian Society of Pediatrics also. So the criteria, as Satish was mentioning, is there should be a fever of greater than 3 days, but the Obstetrics Gynecology Federation and NNF actually mentioned, which is very likely, that this may not be the criteria in newborn, because fever is not a very common symptom in the newborn. So the primary feature of fever may or may not be present in newborn. Though if it is present, it actually solidifies your diagnosis of MIS-N. Okay, and any 2 of the following, this still remains the consensus diagnosis even for MIS-N. Okay, this is the WHO thing of multisystem involvement. Any 2 of the following, skin rash or conjunctivitis, again, which is not been noted in many cases of newborn, shock, which is fairly common in newborn, coagulopathy, which is common, myocardial dysfunction, and acute GI symptoms, and also elevated inflammatory markers, ProCal, CRP, ESR, and we have to rule out other causes of inflammation like Satish was mentioning, and there should be evidence of COVID-19 or contact with likely COVID-19. Right. So in the newborn, what investigations would you do when you have a child with possibly MIS-N? Okay. Will be chest and abdominal X-ray to look for both infiltrates in the chest as well as any causes of respiratory failure and pulmonary hypertension, as well as anything which suggests necrotizing enterocolitis or something which is mimicking NEC. ECG, echocardiogram to look for myocardial dysfunction, as well as features of persistent pulmonary hypertension. counts to look for leukocytosis, leukopenia, and lymphopenia, and also thrombocytopenia. Electrolytes, because hyponatremia has been noted in a fair number of babies who have MISN and creatinine, coagulation profile PT, APTT, fibrinogen, right, D-dimer, LDH, troponin and BNP, and RT-PCR. Please note that especially in the newborn, a first swab, which is generally recommended at 24 to 48 hours, may be negative because we might be doing the swab. Whether it's for a COVID-19 pneumonia or for an MISN, it might be too early in the phase of the disease for you to have an RT-PCR. So generally the recommendation is that if you have a baby whose symptoms are not in consonance with your clinical diagnosis, or the baby does not respond as you would like the baby to respond, then repeat a RT-PCR. What we had, our practice here in CMC previously was to do the RT-PCR after 72 hours. Okay, we talked to virology because there was not real consensus as to when the transmission would take place from the mother to the newborn when there was peripartum maternal infection. So we did it after 3 days, right? And if the baby was symptomatic, we repeated it after 5 days, even if the 5 to 7 days, even if the first RT-PCR was negative, right? Management again in MISN will be respiratory management as required, nothing very specific for MISN. Cardiac dysfunction, we have to look at fluid resuscitation. As with other diseases in the newborn, one thing is we do not keep giving repeated boluses of crystalloids. Mostly we stick to 1 or 2 boluses of crystalloid, and inotropes, milrinone, dobutamine, vasopressin, adrenaline, dopamine, etc. Pulmonary hypertension has been variously treated with inhaled nitric oxide, sildenafil, milrinone, vasopressin. Coagulopathy with low molecular weight heparin, though, like I said, the evidence in newborn is not very high, and blood products. Steroids, there have been varying doses of steroids. What the NNF recommends is 0.15 milligram per kg per day as a single dosage for anywhere from 5 to 14 days. But other guidelines state anywhere between 0.15 to 0.3 milligrams per kg per day. Methylprednisolone, though there is a recommendation for very ill newborn for the high dose pulse methylprednisolone of 15 to 30 milligrams per kg per day, most studies and case reports have used the low dose methylprednisolone of 2 milligrams per kg per day. IVIG, again, though NNF and FOXI say that the quality of evidence is rather poor on the use of IVIG. The dose is 2 milligram per kg in 2 to 3 divided doses. Most, in the recommended guidelines, they have also recommended IVIG as part of the recommendation for MISN. Right. There is little to no evidence in newborn of the following. Okay. In Thailand, the Ministry of Health actually recommends combination of favipiravir and lopinavir, but there is no evidence of actually usage, and I have not seen any case series from Thailand of either treatment of COVID-19 or MISN after use of favipiravir lopinavir combination. Remdesivir, again, RCPCH also says remdesivir as a second line treatment in neonatal COVID of 5 milligram per kg on day 1, followed by 2.5 milligram per kg days 2 to 10. But again, there is very little evidence for use of remdesivir in the newborn. We do not use remdesivir in the newborn, and NNF also does not recommend remdesivir in the newborn. Okay. In China, there have been various case reports of a combination of ritonavir, lopinavir in China, as well as enoxaparin 550 to 300 units per kg per day. Biological agents, again, tocilizumab, anakinra, like Satish said, not available in India, infliximab. Again, there is no evidence in India. I don't think, though RCPCH says you can use tocilizumab, there are not many studies of use in newborn. Okay. I just wanted to talk about 3 babies who we have recently managed. Like I said, in the first wave of COVID, we managed about 270 mothers who were COVID positive, of whom 3 babies were COVID positive, including 2 preterm babies. Okay, none of them were very sick. They had their usual course through hospital, and all of them went home well. In the second wave, though, we've had 4 babies. We've had 112 mothers who were COVID positive. Okay, so we had about 3 babies who were COVID positive and 1 baby who we strongly suspected of having either COVID-19 pneumonia or MIS-N, okay, and of 112 babies. So we've had more sicker babies in the second wave, right? So you can notice this is again seen, something which is seen in most case series of COVID-19 or MIS-N in newborn. Though there are criteria, there are widely varying levels of ferritin, D-dimer, BNP, etc. So finally, I think it boils down to a question of whether this baby has myocardial dysfunction, whether the baby has coagulopathy, whether the baby has other system involvement, right? And things like PPHN to diagnose MIS-N, right? So the first baby was who came from Chad. Actually, the baby was, we had did 2 RT-PCRs and the RT-PCRs were negative, but the baby's grandfather was COVID positive 14 days prior to birth. And the mother was also actually having symptoms until about 7 days prior to birth. And the mother did not come into the hospital for about 7 days, right? The baby actually, sorry. So, sorry, I just made a mistake. The negative and positive should be for the first baby, and the second baby was actually RT-PCR negative. I'm talking about the second baby. So this baby came from Chad and had a lung which was pretty solid and required very high FiO2 and would not respond to conventional ventilation or high frequency ventilation. So finally, by day 7, we got this history of COVID positive in the grandfather 14 days prior to birth, right? And the mother about 7 days prior to birth. But the mother and the baby tested negative. At that point, we could not do antibodies in the baby, right? And we gave a 3-day course of dexamethasone, and the baby just came off ventilation. And we suspected strongly that this baby could have had COVID-19 pneumonia. The first baby, the mother was positive, right? And the baby had all inflammatory markers. Slowly, the baby deteriorated over the first 7 days, went on to CPAP. Inflammatory markers rose, right? And the baby also had seizures and fever by day 7. Baby responded just to CPAP and dexamethasone for about 7 days. The third baby was rather very interesting because this mother actually had idiopathic chronic ITP. So this baby was at mother's side, and the mother was also COVID positive. The baby was in the mother's side, and as with any mother with chronic ITP, we were checking the baby's blood for thrombocytes, right? The first platelets were 72,000. So the baby was monitored. And by day 3, the platelets fell to 22,000. So the baby was brought into nursery and the baby was RT-PCR positive, right? So we gave, as with autoimmune thrombocytopenia, the treatment for autoimmune thrombocytopenia is to give IVIG. So we gave 2 days of IVIG, 2 grams per kg. The platelets actually did not improve. The platelets fell to 14,000. And then the next course of therapy in autoimmune thrombocytopenia is methylprednisolone for 5 days. So we gave the course of methylprednisolone 2 milligram per kg per day for 5 days, right? So the baby's platelets came up to about 92,000 and the baby remained stable as far as the platelets go. But unfortunately, by day 10, 2 days after stopping the methylprednisolone, the baby started developing respiratory symptoms, slowly deteriorated, went on to oxygen, CPAP, ventilation, high frequency ventilation, had grossly deranged coagulation parameters, had severe myocardial dysfunction and severe persistent pulmonary hypertension. Surprisingly, this baby's CRP twice done was actually normal, but he had all other features of MIS-N. So this baby again had another course of IVIG, methylprednisolone, then we went on to dexamethasone, enoxaparin, and also treatment for inhaled nitric oxide. But unfortunately, this baby could not be saved. So this baby finally succumbed on day 27 of life. This was the only baby that we lost over this pandemic, right? So this was the first baby who, like I said, came in and by day 7 started developing respiratory symptoms. This was the second baby who initially looked like very low volume lungs, came from Chad and did not respond to ventilation. And finally, after giving dexamethasone, this baby responded. And this was the third baby. As you can see, the X-ray is slowly deteriorating from day 5 to the lungs becoming worse and worse. And the baby also developing, profound myocardial dysfunction and persistent pulmonary hypertension, which was non-responsive. And finally, the baby died on day 27. Okay, so the bottom line in the newborn is as with any other disease in the newborn, less is more in the newborn. So finally, everything depends on supportive management. The only thing which there is a fair consensus in the newborn is in severe illness in the newborn, whether it's COVID-19 pneumonia or MISN, is the use of steroids, whether that be dexamethasone or methylprednisolone, or in a few case series, they have used hydrocortisone also. IVIG, though guidelines do mention IVIG, there are not many case studies or case series, though many of the guidelines do mention IVIG, right? And manage PPHN, like I said, many of the case series in newborn in MISN have, the babies have presented with persistent pulmonary hypertension. The treatment there is not very different from PPHN because of any other cause. Other therapeutics are going to be conditional, right? I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sridhar sir, as well as Satish sir. I think they were excellent lectures which have addressed all the important and pertinent points about MIS-C and MIS-N. And I think it must have been extremely informative, and for all the participants, I know it was extremely informative for me. I think if it is all right for everyone, we can do a few questions from the participants.
Sure.
Sure. So, Satish sir, there is a question by Dr. Mahesh, that which I think is a question from many people, that it is often hard to exclude MIS-C. As we know, MIS-C is a diagnosis of exclusion, which requires some mandatory tests of an ever-increasing list of diseases, be it malaria, dengue, typhoid, rickettsia. So, and it is often each of these tests have their fallacies and false negative, false positive reports. Like Enteric, there are tests like Vidal, which we won't get positive in the first week. So we will have false negative patients also. So what to do in this, and do we have to be sure about all the diseases being negative before we embark on the treatment?
Sure. So I'll answer this question. So what happens is same things. So MIS-C is a clinical diagnosis based on the clinical features, because ESR CRP is going to be high in your typhoid. Okay, so we cannot really prove or disprove when initially have. So what we do is, somebody is not in shock. I'll tell you, 5 days of fever, mild red eye congestion plus minus. What we do, you treat like any other fever. We start on, if the child is less than 5 days, we do blood culture, start on ceftriaxone and doxycycline. If the child has got hemoconcentration, you think of dengue. Then you start treating for that. MIS-C, let the child, like the symptoms comes more and more. By the time you will get a blood culture, then you can start treatment. Remember that the MIS-C going to the ICU is always a question, whether to give IVIG, steroids. So that times EBAR agrees. Empirically, we'll start on 2 milligram per kg of steroids. Somebody comes with shock. Okay, and wait for the other reports to come, and you closely monitor them. Okay.
Yeah, those two, correct.
Okay, somebody comes with shock, severe ICU, when 2 inotropes is going. I don't know whether MIS-C or not. Antibodies will come 2 days later. RT-PCR maybe comes immediately. But till the time you treat with, like sepsis, you treat with whatever depending on your antibiotic protocol, and you give 2 milligram of steroids. 2 milligram of steroid doesn't make anything really worse initially.
Yeah, but even in our ICU, yeah, we had similar patients. That's what we have. Maybe I can show the protocol clearly what we have followed. And this febrile inflammatory pattern, it's really a vague thing, right? You have a CRP, fever.
Yes.
That's what Satish is saying. You may have to wait and observe rather than. So if the child comes to ICU, probably we'll just start a low dose. But even in that group, we have observed a couple of patients not giving anything and sent out as well. But we have got some or 4 or 5 patients, both scrub ELISA as well as CRP being high, antibodies positive, and dengue 1 patient as well. So for these patients, we have given a low dose steroids. They were moderate shock. So even though there is no word in intensive care called moderate shock, we defined as I can show the protocol which we follow. So yes, 2 mg low dose, and we observe and treat the scrub. We have a SR, we start doxycycline in the very first instance as well.
So what I understand from the discussion is that our real worry is the outcome of poor coronary perfusion or the myocardial dysfunction and going into shock. So is there any way we can, in your experience, which phenotype should we be monitoring? Which is the high-risk phenotype who can
It's
go
a
into?
shock phenotype. Remember that the shock phenotype, the last phenotype, which gives the multi-organ dysfunction. So that's why we are a little bit, sometimes myself and Yabar will have an argument, give IVIG. Yabar will say that this is infection. So we have some argument keeps on going between me and him. Other things and all is pretty straightforward. Okay, if it's a KD-like phenotype, you give IVIG. Febrile inflammatory state, you rule out all the other infections before you give steroids. But that mode, because there's no time, because child is so sick on, as you said, ejection fraction is very low.
Yeah, see, but that's true, but we don't know. So we published, Satish showed a paper, we had about 17 patients. And so I think 44% of them only received IVIG. The remaining just steroids we gave. That time this was from the first wave. We are given just that low dose dexamethasone. And as of now, we followed them, not long-term follow-up echo has not been done. Yes, I agree. But the immediate follow-up, the echo has been normal. There we couldn't see any coronary dilatation. But still a worry, I am not saying, because Satish, you would remember, he showed a paper showing in AHI circulation, 18 to 48% of them who presented like a severe type had coronary dilatation. So yes, we need to have a real trial to see. Probably if the moderators permit, I can share my screen. Is that okay, Joel and Romit? Just 2 minutes.
Absolutely, sir. Just because in these patients, what we have seen, unfortunately, they invariably have high inflammatory markers like high CRP and ESR, but concomitantly, they will have high procalcitonin as well. And in Indian scenario, these patients, we would more likely than not treat as infection. And in many of these patients, after 4 to 5 days, they have gone staphylococcus and what in retrospect, a TSS variant as compared to a KSS variant of MISC. So I think, as you rightly said, this debate between the intensivist and the rheumatologist will always be there about whether or not steroids under the cover of antibiotics need to be given in case of shock.
Yeah, you're right. See, not everyone has the luxury of having a rheumatologist and intensivist. So we are blessed to have a team to discuss. So that is a big dilemma from the peripheries when they are treating in this season. So if it is not during the post-COVID, you might treat like any other febrile sepsis or a tropical infection, right? So if you look at this is the protocol which Satish showed. This little we have reviewed this, and this in the left-hand corner we put febrile inflammatory, which is not fitting into MIS-C definition. This is what we are talking about, like fever with elevated inflammatory markers. Probably one organ may be involved, but no shock, no cardiac, no Kawasaki features. So here we need to exclude sepsis and other tropical infections. If the fever persists more than 48 hours, you repeat. Like this, Satish may say a lot of patients you would have treated like that, right, Satish?
Yeah.
And if there is more than one organ, then we may have to come into the MIS-C criteria. Otherwise, we may have to really observe. But this observing phase is very difficult during this. So most of them tend to give the steroids. Yes, I do agree. But this is one category we need to remember. Again, what WHO and IAP all categorize as 3. One mild MIS-C and MIS-C with shock or a severe variety and a Kawasaki. So we also go by the same. MIS-C with mild, that is a non-life threatening, no shock, but fitting into the criteria as WHO has shown. And now in the shock, see what our experience in the second wave, most of them have gone like moderate to moderate shock, probably like what I mentioned is a fluid and a low dose, like one dose, one adrenaline less than 0.2. So that is what we categorize as moderate. So, but here we observe them in ICU and how they are behaving, and depends on that we give. When we say moderate shock, we are not giving IVIG. We just give low dose methylprednisolone. Here we had a lot of discussions, yes, because Satish has a lot of concerns about these patients. So methylprednisolone low dose, and we follow them very closely. Okay, so in the 36 to 48 hours, there should be response. Fever has to come down, CRP has to come down. Otherwise, we brand them as refractory disease and go ahead with IVIG or pulse 10 mg per kg methylprednisolone. See, severe shock or myocardial dysfunction, no doubt, IVIG. Okay, plus we do give plus, we start with 2 mg per kg and then give the IVIG. And the organ threatening, this is not like shock inducing multi-organ dysfunction. No, they can present, we have seen a couple of patients just presenting with liver dysfunction, encephalopathy, and antibodies positive. 2 patients we had like that. So that we put organ threatening is in the CDC also. They define certain patients like this. May not be many. Then this is in the what Missy shock type. The third is Kawasaki incomplete or complete. Here also no debate. So just give IVIG and the steroids also. Then MAS HLH is a very less number of patients probably. This is what we did. See, if you look at this, we had about 65 patients so far. And you can see that Missy with moderate is about 15 patients among the 65, 23%. That is what I mentioned, moderate shock. The severe shock is about 13, probably is almost equal, right? So we have, for this moderate shock, we have given this low dose methylprednisolone. And as I told, there were 2 children with end organ threatening disease. Most of them is like an incomplete Kawasaki. Yeah, everything is put at, but I remember one patient had complete Kawasaki, like with echo feature saying coronary aneurysm. All of them they received IVIG and steroid. This febrile inflammatory, 3, I think how many, 4 are there. 2 patients we didn't give anything. Just observed and sent them. The other patients were not shocked, but that was initial period in May. We just gave them, like they may be in the mild Missy type, we gave the low dose steroids. So this is what the medication which we have given. Like low dose means as 2 mg methylprednisolone, about 28 of them. Almost half of them just received 2 mg per kg. And about these all in the incomplete and the severe shock. What about high dose? This is what about 4 patients that refractory. 4 patients, we remember very clearly, they went in 48 hours, fever was persistent, even after giving IVIG. So we have to give pulse dose methylprednisolone. And 1 child to receive tocilizumab. That is, child went into MAS and HLH. So this is what our experience. So I know it is very difficult without a great the multidisciplinary team, and so we need to see them follow up, and probably will publish, and then we can come to a conclusion as well.
So I just want to add, as Yabar said, so these are the ICU things. So ward, we have some few of the patients. I said no, only out of 10, 8 goes to ICU. 2 of them are in the ward. So that patients, what they come with like Kawasaki illness without shock. So those patients, if they have a Kawasaki-like illness, we give IVIG plus 2 milligram of steroids. We don't give pulse steroids and all. And we discharge them once the child get better, 2 to 3 weeks of oral steroids. We taper and stop by maximum of 3 weeks. And we never send anybody on oral anticoagulation. Answer is no. We don't send them anybody on anticoagulation.
That's
and we do,
really...
we do repeat echo at 2 weeks. Whether the first echo is normal or not is the same protocol what we follow for Kawasaki disease. We repeat echo at 2 weeks and we repeat echo at 6 weeks. Even though the first echo is normal, there is a chance of developing coronary artery involvement. We do it 2 weeks and 6 weeks. The 6 weeks echo is also normal. We stop doing the echoes. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, sorry. So there's a question in the chat box relating to the same. So the question is the dose of methylprednisolone related to the outcome, essentially? So this is really interesting that in refractory cases, you are actually trying pulse dose methylprednisolone and they are actually responding. Do we have literature evidence on this, that not on MIS-C itself, but otherwise?
See, the MIS-C in Kawasaki disease, the MIS-C, the whole treatment concept of MIS-C came from KD. So in the Kawasaki disease, giving high dose methylprednisolone. Like you start along, there is a study for that to give methylprednisolone 30 milligram per kilogram along with IVIG. IVIG is a standard of care. They didn't find there is decreased incidence of coronary artery involvement even if you add on steroids along with IVIG. So this high dose steroids to prevent coronary aneurysm, we don't have a solid evidence. And steroids are the second line agent in Kawasaki disease.
See, Joel, in our setup, it's quite difficult. See, I can show some really examples of patients. After seeing these patients only, actually, we also divided like in May, this protocol and then come to this. We had a similar CRP was high. That turned out to be a toxic shock syndrome. Like what is similar, everything. So we gave IVIG, I think so, Satish, right? And that patient on the 4th day, staff is positive and MRSA. So at the same time, we have to consider this also when we have a high CRP. And so this low, that's what we chose, this low dose in our setup, but we'll follow them. We'll just closely. And your worry of coronary, we don't know. We need to see this after 3 months of echo, and then only we can say, yes, no worries. This is a less chance of developing.
So we have only one child which I am following who was presented like a Miss C. Is an infant who had coronary artery involvement, still having, is on follow-up with me now. So that child had Miss C with coronary artery involvement. All the other things, the myocarditis are all doing extremely very well. The repeat echoes, they don't have a permanent damage to the heart. We have some severe myocarditis patients, remember, like ejection fraction 50% and all. They all do very well.
Absolutely, yeah. So this wave, fortunately, probably we didn't lose any of them. There was, except that MA, the child who went into, but the child is an aplastic anemia, was treated, and he had like incomplete Kawasaki rash and all presented. Then it went into cytokine storm. For that child only, we gave tocilizumab, but we lost this child. Apart from that, all of them have escaped. And yes, cardiovascular, in the first wave, I think 2 of them went for ECMO as well. So one child survived, one child succumbed to the illness. Mani Vachakan has commented like all.
I think there's a.
I think Yabar's Mani was said that like all the rheumatology patients, difficult to differentiate. So cover with antibiotics and start steroids. I agree with you, Mani. We have to treat both.
So any questions for Dr. Sridhar? So Sridhar, your last patient, the CRP was normal, right?
Yeah, that is the one thing that we could not really figure out why, Avdina, because this baby had all other symptoms, fever, all toxic symptoms, except the fact that CRP did not rise at all. So.
But do you have to have a criteria to say that it has to be raised?
No. See, like I told you, there is no uniform criteria for MISN. Okay. So they are trying to just extrapolate the WHO criteria for MISC and extrapolate it to newborn. But like I said, there is no consensus also, because some of these things you will not see in the newborn at all. See, even in a normal course in the first week of life, you do get lymphopenia in the newborn, right? It's neutrophil predominant newborn, right? And you will not get fever. Fever is a very unlikely symptom in the newborn, more likely environmental related and thing. So some of these things need to change. So, so like I said, they are extrapolating the same thing of increased inflammatory markers in newborn also, which we generally see. The RCPCH has actually said that their consensus is the CRP should be more than 150. I'm not sure who will have they started with 300. The initial consensus was 300, right? And then they came down to 150. I don't know, Joel can
but you see, in our MIS-C in children, we do see quite a high CRP, Satish?
Yeah.
All are about 300. We are seeing quite a bit.
Yeah, so we hardly see 150 and all in newborn. I'm not sure the liver is mature enough to even produce that much, CRP. So I'm not sure. So we will. Like I said, the criteria are still possibly evolving. There might be a more uniform criteria for newborn, a different criteria also over time. Hopefully, COVID-19 will disappear by then, so we may not have MISN.
It's interesting to note that early and late COVID infection category also in newborn. That is quite unique, right? Early and late. Money has put what is the time is important. No wait and watch for steroids. Maybe IVIG next day morning. So what is trying to say?
He is trying to make some comments on rheumatologist.
Any
No, no.
questions?
He's speaking, I
Romit,
think, like a critical care therapist saying steroids should take precedence over IVIG.
IVIG,
also, because
okay.
for us, we shoot with steroids. So.
Correct. Joel and Romit.
I absolutely agree, sir. Though the other side is also true. We have had a lot of patients who come to us like during the first wave. We had a lot of private practitioners who were treating mild infections with steroids as well. And post the first wave, we had a resurgence of liver abscesses across the state. So we need to know that yes, in the right patient, in the right situation, it is the drug of choice and it does. But steroids need to be respected for the immunosuppression that it can cause. So yes, we need to give it, but we need to be very careful in what patient we are giving it in.
Very right. Yeah, very right.
Yes.
There was another question in the chat box regarding anticoagulation, but I think it's explained very well in the lecture, so I'm not addressing that about aspirin.
Aspirin.
Just,
Many
I just
questions
wanted
come.
to ask
Satish, you
the
want to say it
experience of
again?
direct thrombin inhibitors.
Which one? Aspirin?
Yeah, about the
So
aspirin and
yeah. So remember that all these children who are sick in the ICU with shock and all don't give aspirin. Okay, especially when they have low platelets. The aspirin concept also same thing from the KD phenotype. Okay, so they given recommendation if they have thrombocytosis. I told you in MIS-C, usually it is thrombocytopenia or low platelets. Again, on those people, if you give aspirin, they may bleed. Second thing, if they have a coronary artery involvement, yes, we have to give aspirin. The third thing is the documented thrombosis. These are the three things where we talk about low dose aspirin. There is nothing called high dose aspirin, what we use in Kawasaki disease, 30 to 50 milligram. It is not there in the protocol of MIS.
And enoxaparin also we don't use, we don't look at the dimer and do that. Probably when they are in the critical stage, we may consider, but not. What about Joel? What is your experience there in Great Ormond Street in using anti-enoxaparin?
Yeah, we do use enoxaparin prophylactic dose, but we do not monitor unless there is a
So
renal
it is protocolized. So mean that any child who comes into ICU will receive severe disease.
Yes. So we send a clotting study. So if your PT, APTT, everything is normal, no risk of bleeding, you start on prophylactic low molecular weight. We do not monitor the levels of anti-10A unless there is a renal impairment. If there is a risk of kidney dysfunction, then yes, the peak and the trough levels are monitored. In neonates, I was actually quite, it was interesting to see the study from Taiwan, which said they were giving enoxaparin 150 to 300 units per kg per day, quite a high dose. That's a
that is very true. But some of the things, I think the Thailand thing actually mentions 150 to 300 units per kg per day. Even I was very thin. Like I said, problem with the newborn thing is there are no studies. Some of these things, I don't know where they get the evidence from, but some guidelines have been written as a thing. So I think it will evolve.
So I just wanted to ask your experience with direct thrombin inhibitors in pediatrics, like Roxaban or Abexiban. Have you used it in the COVID wave, or were you using only enoxaparin? Just asking the experience with the direct thrombin inhibitors, because a lot of the well-researched relatives used to come and ask us that why are you administering enoxaparin and we are having to give injections, and why aren't you giving my kid Roxaban or Abexiban? So we used to
I
say
don't
that
have
the
any
pediatric
experience. What is the cost of them?
Yeah, so I just wanted to know.
What is the cost?
So because we didn't use it, our adult counterparts were using it light and center, but we have been sticking on to our old favorite. I just wanted to know if you have any experience in that regard.
No, Romit, we don't have.
Yeah.
See, most of the drugs are not even approved to use in children.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so
And we don't send
that's what
anybody
we
on,
used to say.
anybody on anticoagulation when they go home also. Only during that ICU period when they are really sick with shock, multi-organ failure, we use. When they come to the ward itself, we stop them.
Yes, yes, yes.
Because
Very
sir,
short, very short
here
duration.
at MAMC, we had a lot of cases, like Kawasaki shock syndromes, as well as a lot of patients who had come to us with MIC. Here we used to follow the D-dimer criteria. So if they have more than 1,000, we tended to use enoxaparin, and specifically more commonly in the prophylactic dose. But if the patients were sick, we used to give therapeutic dose as well. And though we did not have the luxury of monitoring anti-10A levels, but these patients did not have any complications and did not have any thrombotic events in the course of stay. So I think our experience with the use of treatment dose has been good.
See, most of the thing we are extrapolate from adults.
Yeah.
D-dimer, have you
Yes,
ever
sir.
done in our ICU before? We don't know about this.
Exactly.
D-dimer.
IL-6, sir.
Whether it is
IL-6,
IL-6
we never used to do
also.
them.
Whenever
We never
used to
do
do
them.
them. And IL-6,
Yes,
I don't
sir.
know, some studies they put as a predictor of the severity. I don't know. We have done some patients. Those who become very sick, the IL-6 was very low. So I don't have a number to statistically to say that. So we are yet to know about these lab results also. And we don't know the D-dimer level in a normal critically ill patients, right? So that's what we are doing. Jolly is doing a study there in our ICU. And so then it's giving and treating these numbers. I'm not very sure. And
Absolutely,
so
sir.
yeah. Kala, is there Kala, you want to comment anything? Jolly?
And
Kala.
no, about it's very interesting discussion, very enlightening and very interesting. Good to see Joel. Okay.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Please
Jolly,
continue. Yeah.
Jolly, you want to say anything?
No, sir. It was a very good discussion, especially the MISN. I think we didn't hear much about MISN. So it was
Absolutely. It is very nice to hear about the new
You
one.
still haven't heard much, Jolly.
You can give us another talk, sir.
Sure.
No, absolutely. Because Sridhar, I was telling Sridhar, please, you have to give. So you were saying, what can I talk in your forum? But it's very, very informative.
Very
Sridhar, thank you
interesting.
so much. Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Romit and Joel. Very nice to see them moderating.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any question? There was maximum dose, or you put maximum is 150 milligram. Maximum dose of aspirin in obese children.
Yeah, prophylaxis.
So that is like an adult dose.
Adult dose, okay. Maximum 150 milligrams.
Any other question? Anybody wish to unmute and talk also? It's you're welcome. Maybe for next 4 to 5 minutes we can then we can wind up. You guys have seen a lot of Missy in Great Ormond Street, Joel?
Yes, sir. The Missy used to come to Great Ormond Street because this was the pathway for Missy was to send any child with a shock in Great Ormond Street. So we saw all of them.
What about cardiac? Like they've gone in the ECMO and all, or how was their?
So ECMO was for respiratory actually. There was a child with brittle asthma who had previous 8 ICU admissions with asthma exacerbations, and she came with a very bad COVID pneumonia. Okay. So she required the respiratory ECMO, but she came out of it and she went home.
Acute COVID experience yesterday. Winsley was putting up the statistics. All had comorbid factors. Whoever died also. Very less number. It was about less than 1.4% was the morbid mortality among them. But not many. All of them had comorbidities, and but Missy is
obesity is also a comorbidity which we have seen. Those patients, those pediatric patients who were obese were also had a worse prognosis alongside underlying interstitial lung disease like AVPA. So I think they have been bad. And tuberculosis as an association with the COVID has had worse prognosis. as compared to not. And
Yeah, I remember same thing. One doctor's child, one pediatrician child, we had a tough time. This child was obese, 6 years old child, some 48 kg. Yabar remembers that child. Was admitted in the ward, went into shock. We gave 2 milligram per kg, did not improve. We had to become refractory shock. We had to go up on steroids, and we had a very tough time. Finally, the child did really very well.
Yes.
Child is well. 6 years, 48 kg.
Yeah.
Pediatrician child.
Sir, regarding the Z-scores for coronary artery aneurysm, you said anything about 2.5 would go on aspirin and about 10 would be going on to enoxaparin. So suppose your coronary artery aneurysm is worsening, do you transition to enoxaparin or you just up the immunomodulators? What would be the strategy?
So this is also again from the KD protocol from the American Heart Association, the Circulation Journal 2017 protocol. So based on that coronary artery, if it is going high, the size, every 2 weeks we have to do echo. If they have aneurysm, every 2 weeks till they become normal size. So we continue steroids. Sometimes if it is going high, we will give infliximab. That's what maximum we have gone up to. Then based on the number, the Z score is more than 10, that is called large aneurysm. The recommendation is to give aspirin, statins, and anticoagulation. But we never had a so big aneurysm, we never had so far.
Yeah, if there is no other moderators,
Yes.
you want to say a few remarks and finish, then I will.
excellent, Sadish sir. Thanks a lot for inviting me, sir. I think it was an all-encompassing lecture with erudite speakers who have shared their experience as well with this particular condition. And I think it is a case-by-case basis, which every single case is unique. It is always good to have some protocols, but every single case has to be evaluated with the importance that it deserves. So I think it is an excellent venture by CMC. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, Romit.
Thank you for inviting me also, and very active discussions. It was really definitely enlightening, and the speakers for keeping their time. They were so sharp on that. So congratulations on that, and thanks to ABERSA for arranging and organizing this for all of the hospitals as well. I'm sure this is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Romit, and thanks, Joel, for joining. It is really wonderful and fantastic experience to have you all on board and to moderate wonderfully. It was nice discussions.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you very much to see you guys. And thanks a lot, Satish, as usual. He covers, that's what I put all about Misty. So thanks a lot, Joel and Romit, for your wonderful session there. And thanks, Satish and Sridhar. So we've covered, I think that's what I meant. I put all about Missy. If you want to know, please join today's session. So that is true. So Satish has covered everything as usual, and Sridhar has a lot of insight so that we can learn a lot of things about this newborn COVID. And Missy, thank you, Sridhar, and thank you, Satish.
Pleasure.
And
nice.
Thank you.